In this video, I will provide you with a few ideas on problems you could run into if you have a cracked foundation where it's the corner of the building and it's sinking into the ground. Definitely seen this a few times before. First thing that we need to talk about will be any doorways or windows. If you have a window that you can no longer open or a door you can no longer open, very good chance it's because there's enough pressure from the framing starting to deform and get out of level and out of plumb. So not uncommon to have the headers separate and the cripples or the jack studs separate also. Here we can see where the headers got a bigger gap at the bottom. The trimmer is actually pulled away from the king stud here, and of course it looks like it's pulling the jack stud away too. These are all cripples. Sorry about that. We always referred to them as cripples, tops and bottoms, but other people refer to them for different things, trying to cover all my bases there. The windowsill framing plate. This is straight. I doubt if something like this would happen, where it would be tight at one end on one cripple and then not on the other jack studs. You probably have something like this where the board would be bowed. And bowed lumber will probably need to be replaced. And that's kind of the main reason why I'm making the video. A lot of people think that, hey, I can just raise this stuff up and everything will be okay. It might not work all the time. So here are the framing plates. We can see that they have settled down a little bit and are no longer straight. I'm drawing this in here like this, but you need to keep in mind that these are examples, and this might not be what your building looks like. It might be a combination of the things in the video. For example, you might have gaps between the framing plates. You might have gaps between the wall studs, or there might be gaps at the bottom of between the foundation and the framing plate, bottom plate, or again the jack studs, depending upon how the building was assembled. Next up on the list, we'll take a look at the ceiling joist. Sometimes the joist will sink right along with the concrete foundation damage. And if that's the case, it would look something like this, and you might be able to see some of the damage on the exterior or interior as the home is starting to twist into a shape that it wasn't originally built to be. So depending on where the joists break, you might actually have joists that pop up in other sections. So let's just say that the joist broke on this wall right here, and there's probably not going to be a lot of problems with something like this. But if it breaks on another section, then the walls that are supporting it, or the walls that are in front of the breaks, could actually act as a fulcrum, some type of a lever, and push the other end of the joist up instead of bowing it. So it just depends upon how much pressure. Again, the building foundation damage is going to put pressure on other components in the house. These components will either break, bow, or detach from whatever they were attached to. Something like this, you have a joist, and then let's say that this is a closet right here. We got a hallway or another closet over here. You might actually see damage on the inside as it separates, as the drywall separates from the corners. It might raise, you might have a half-inch gap in between the drywall, the top of the drywall that was assembled to the wall, and the drywall that was attached to the ceiling joist. Or you could actually have the nails separate, or the screws, and the drywall on the ceiling will remain in place, but the ceiling joists will now be separated from the top, or the top side of the drywall. If somehow the ridge was to remain stationary and not move, let's just say that it was a beam, you had a cathedral ceiling here, or you had a wall supporting the ridge, and the ridge isn't going to move, that actually might cause the rafters or the walls to actually pull in. So it's going to be more common for the walls to pull in than the rafters. But again, there are stress points, and whatever the weakest point is going to probably suffer the most damage. So if the joist, the ceiling joist and the roof rafters are firmly secured to the top plates, there's a very good chance it's just going to pull the wall in with it. But if they weren't, and this is a weak point, then it could actually pull the rafter away from the framing plates. Here's another thing that could happen if the rafters do not detach from the framing plates. You could actually have rafters that separate from the roof ridge, and this could separate on both sides. You could have, if there's enough pressure to where it needs to pull 2 inches away from the ridge, you might have 1 inch on this side and then 1 inch on the other side. This is probably more along the lines of what would happen. I went ahead and lowered these two end rafters, and you can see again where it's tight at the bottom, gap at the top, tight at the bottom, gap at the bottom kind of scenario instead of a nice tight fit. And the ridge here, the rafters were left in place, but the ridge here, I just wanted to show you how much it would be sagging if this was a scenario where, or more of a common scenario, these rafters would be attached to the ridge and sagging along with these two on the ends. Hope that makes sense. So just not along this, you can see it straight here, and then it's kind of curving, getting pulled over to this side. And so not only will it be pulled down, but it can also be pulled over to one side. And this would be a good example of something that might need to be replaced. If you have a deformed piece of lumber because of the pressure that's been put on it over a few decades, let's say, then you might go to raise the one side of it and end up raising another section that's already bowed. And if you can't get that section to straighten out, then the ridge would probably need to be replaced. I didn't mention the cracks that you could have on the inside or the outside of the building, but they're usually going to be along the pressure points. You know, if the damage is right here, probably going to be a crack in here somewhere on the inside or outside of the house, or both, depending upon the house, how the house was constructed. So just last part of the video, I just wanted to show you a couple more pressure points. This rafter, of course, is in the original location. You could have stuff separating here from the plates, as I mentioned earlier, or you could have a nice crack in one of the framing components. Again, the weakest spot is going to be where it suffers the most. I mean, if you could just imagine having a large knot here and a large knot here in the lumber, you could have a crack here and a crack here. You could have multiple cracks, not just one crack. You could have a crack, and then the rest of the pressure is causing this section of the framing component to bow. So, and this just giving you another view. You can see where it is here with the pressure. But the last thing I wanted to point out is that you can actually have components like the roof sheathing and the fascia board support other parts of the framing and raise it up. You know, you might have a rafter with ceiling joist, and you're like, what's holding this thing up? Well, it could be the fascia board and the sheathing. Now, with that said, the sheathing and the fascia board might also need to be replaced, because this could be materials that over the years have bowed themselves and aren't going to be able to be straightened out. So anyway, that's it for the video, and I am going to make another part to the video. I'll put a tag in here, put it over here somewhere, maybe that's where Google puts it, or YouTube, but or there'll be a link at the end of the video to part 2 to this one on how to actually fix some of this damage.